Imagine a woman whose name still evokes awe and admiration, whose history is shrouded in mystery, and whose power extended over one of the world's oldest and richest kingdoms. Who was she, this ruler whose name became synonymous with seduction, intelligence, and political genius? How was it that one woman, as queen of Hellenistic Egypt, was able to capture the hearts of two of Rome's most powerful men and influence the course of an entire empire's history? Her name was Cleopatra, and today we will embark on a long, tranquil journey through the centuries to touch her era, understand her world, and unravel the mystery of her greatness. This is not just a story of love or intrigue. It is a narrative of a turning point in history, when ancient Egypt, striving to preserve its identity, found itself at a crossroads with the rising Rome. We will explore her life, beginning with her birth into the Ptolemaic dynasty, and follow her path to the very end, delving into the details that make her story so captivating and meaningful. Immerse yourself in the atmosphere of antiquity, where the desert sands hold millennial secrets, and the waters of the Nile carry the wisdom of the ages. Let yourself be carried away into a past where every step Cleopatra took was a step toward preserving the heritage of her people. Born in 1690 BC, Cleopatra was more than just another queen. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek dynasty founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, during which time they became deeply integrated into Egyptian culture while maintaining their Greek roots. Egypt at that time was the site of a unique fusion of 2 great civilizations: the ancient Egyptian, with its millennia-old traditions, priesthood, and monumental architecture, and the Hellenistic, brought by Alexander's conquests, with its philosophy, science, and art. This period, known as the Hellenistic period, was a time of great change. The great empires of antiquity, such as Persia, had already given way to new powers. In the West, Rome was gaining power, its legions steadily expanding their borders. Ptolemaic Egypt, despite its wealth and cultural influence, found itself in a complex geopolitical situation. It was a jewel that many coveted. It was in this seething cauldron of cultures and political ambitions that Cleopatra was born, the future queen who would play a decisive role in the fate of her kingdom. Cleopatra's early years were marked by a rigorous education, as was common for heirs to the throne in the Ptolemaic dynasty. She was destined to become a ruler, and this required not only knowledge of statecraft, but also a deep understanding of the culture and language of her people. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra, according to historians, spoke not only Greek, but also Egyptian, a rarity among rulers of her dynasty. She studied history, philosophy, literature, mathematics, and astronomy. Her education was aimed at making her a worthy heir to the throne, capable of negotiating, managing the economy, and understanding the intricacies of diplomacy. She grew up in an atmosphere of palace intrigue and power struggles that characterized the Ptolemies. Her father, Ptolemy XII Aletes, was a ruler whose reign was not easy. He faced internal rebellions and the threat of Roman intervention. Cleopatra, observing these events, learned lessons in politics and survival from a young age. She saw the fragility of power and the importance of alliances and the personal qualities of a ruler. These years forged her character, preparing her for the trials she would face. In 151 BC, after the death of her father, Cleopatra, then about 18 years old, ascended the throne. According to tradition, she was to rule jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was still a child. However, a struggle for real power soon erupted between brother and sister, or rather, between their advisors. Cleopatra, with her strong character and ambition, had no intention of being a puppet. Her decisiveness and desire for independence led to conflict. In 1149 BC, under pressure from courtiers hostile to Cleopatra, she was forced to leave Alexandria and seek refuge outside Egypt. It was a difficult ordeal, but it did not break her. In exile, Cleopatra never lost hope of reclaiming the throne. She understood that to do so, she would need the support of a powerful external power. Her gaze turned to Rome, which at the time was the only superpower capable of influencing the balance of power in the region. It was at this moment that her fate would become intertwined with that of one of Rome's most renowned generals. The Roman general Gaius Julius Caesar, a man of immense power and ambition, arrived in Egypt in 1148 BC, pursuing his own political goals. He was embroiled in a civil war and sought support and resources. Cleopatra, learning of his arrival, saw her opportunity. According to legend, she was secretly transported to the Alexandrian palace, wrapped in a carpet or sack to avoid the attention of her brother's guards. This daring escapade, if it occurred, demonstrates her determination and resourcefulness. The meeting with Caesar was a turning point. Cleopatra, possessing not only beauty, but also a keen intellect, charm, and education, made a lasting impression on Caesar. She presented herself as the legitimate ruler of Egypt, in need of his help to restore her power. Caesar, in turn, saw in her not only a potential ally, but also an opportunity to strengthen Roman influence in Egypt, which was vital for Rome's grain supply. The two forged not just a political alliance, but also a personal relationship that would have a profound impact on the subsequent course of events. This alliance was strategic, based on mutual benefit, but it also marked the beginning of a close bond between Cleopatra and Rome. After Caesar helped Cleopatra defeat her brother's forces, she was restored to the throne. She now ruled Egypt, but under the undisputed protectorate of Rome. Her power was consolidated, but her independence was limited. Caesar, in Alexandria, effectively became the arbiter of Egyptian affairs. He intervened in the dynastic dispute, supporting Cleopatra, and established an order in Egypt that was favorable to Rome. Cleopatra's reign under Caesar was marked by relative stability for Egypt, at least at first glance. Cleopatra focused on strengthening her power domestically, implementing necessary reforms, and rebuilding the economy. Roman influence, however, was palpable. Egypt became an important ally of Rome, supplying grain and other resources. Cleopatra, in turn, received the support necessary to maintain her kingdom. She even visited Rome with Caesar, where she was presented as Queen of Egypt, arousing considerable interest and perhaps some concern among the Roman elite. This period demonstrated how closely the destinies of Egypt and Rome were intertwined, and how one woman found herself at the center of this complex web. The tragic death of Julius Caesar in March 144 BC, when he was assassinated by a conspiracy of Roman senators, sent shockwaves throughout the Mediterranean. For Cleopatra, this meant the loss of a powerful patron and ally. Her position in Rome became vulnerable. She immediately left Rome and returned to Egypt. Egypt, a country with a history spanning millennia, experienced a unique period at the turn of the Common Era. It was a time when ancient traditions collided with the growing influence of a new, powerful force, Rome. Amidst this turbulent tide of history, one of the most famous women of antiquity was born, Cleopatra. She became the last queen of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Greek dynasty that ruled Egypt after the conquests of Alexander the Great. The Ptolemies, descendants of one of Alexander's generals, founded their dynasty in 1323 BC. They sought to preserve Greek culture and language among their people, but at the same time they deeply integrated into Egyptian life. Alexandria, the capital of Egypt, founded by Alexander himself, became one of the greatest cultural and scientific centers of the ancient world. It was home to the famous Library of Alexandria, a treasure trove of knowledge, and the majestic lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Cleopatra was born around 69 BC. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was a ruler whose power was not always secure. He frequently faced internal difficulties and was even forced to leave Egypt for a time, seeking Roman support. This early exposure to the Roman world, with its political intrigues and military might, undoubtedly influenced the young heir to the throne. Cleopatra's upbringing took place in an atmosphere of palace intrigue and political battles. She received an excellent education, typical of rulers of the time. She studied languages, philosophy, and mathematics. It is said that she was the only member of the Ptolemaic dynasty to learn Egyptian, which undoubtedly helped her communicate with the people and consolidate her power. From a young age, she was surrounded by people who groomed her for the role of a future ruler. After her father's death, according to his will, Cleopatra was to rule Egypt jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. However, palace advisors, seeking greater power, turned her brother against Cleopatra. Ultimately, around 50 BCE, she was forced to flee Alexandria, fleeing a conspiracy. This was a time of exile, but it did not break her. On the contrary, it only hardened her resolve. In exile, Cleopatra wasted no time. She sought support to reclaim her rightful throne. It was during this period that her fate crossed with that of one of Rome's most influential men, Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar had arrived in Egypt in pursuit of his political opponents. Upon learning of the dynastic dispute, he saw an opportunity to strengthen Roman influence in this wealthy region. The story of their meeting has become legendary. According to legend, Cleopatra was secretly brought to the palace in Alexandria, wrapped in a carpet or sack to avoid the guards' attention. When she appeared before Caesar, he was struck by her intelligence, beauty, and determination. This moment marked the beginning of their complex alliance. Caesar, recognizing her potential and seeing her as a reliable ally, decided to support her. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra defeated her brother's forces and was restored to the throne. She now ruled Egypt, but under the undisputed protectorate of Rome. Her power was consolidated, but her independence was limited. Caesar, in Alexandria, effectively became the arbiter of Egyptian affairs. He intervened in the dynastic dispute, supporting Cleopatra, and established an order in Egypt that was favorable to Rome. Cleopatra's reign under Caesar was marked by relative stability for Egypt, at least at first glance. Cleopatra focused on strengthening her power domestically, implementing necessary reforms, and rebuilding the economy. Roman influence, however, was palpable. Egypt became an important ally of Rome, supplying grain and other resources. Cleopatra, in turn, received the support necessary to maintain her kingdom. She even visited Rome with Caesar, where she was presented as Queen of Egypt, arousing considerable interest and perhaps some concern among the Roman elite. This period demonstrated how closely the destinies of Egypt and Rome were intertwined, and how one woman found herself at the center of this complex web. The tragic death of Julius Caesar in March 1444 BC, when he was assassinated by a conspiracy of Roman senators, sent shockwaves throughout the Mediterranean. For Cleopatra, this meant the loss of a powerful patron and ally. Her position in Rome became vulnerable. She immediately left Rome and returned to Egypt to maintain her power and find a new path in the changed political landscape. After Caesar's death, Rome plunged into a period of civil war. Power was divided among various generals and politicians, each seeking to increase their influence. Cleopatra, a wise and far-sighted ruler, understood that she needed to find a new, powerful ally to ensure Egypt's security. Her choice fell on Mark Antony, one of the most influential figures of the Roman triumvirate. Their meeting took place in 114 BC, in Tarsus, a city in Asia Minor. Antony, seeking to strengthen his position and secure the support of the eastern provinces, summoned Cleopatra. She arrived on a luxurious boat, introducing herself to him as the goddess Aphrodite. This meeting was not just a political alliance, but also the beginning of a deep personal relationship. Their bond was marked by passion, ambition, and shared political goals. Their joint reign, which lasted more than 10 years, was a time of relative prosperity for Egypt. Cleopatra and Mark Antony sought to strengthen Egypt as a center of power in the East. Antony, in turn, saw Cleopatra and her resources as an opportunity to realize his ambitions in Rome. They conducted joint military campaigns, expanded their holdings, and sought to create a new, more equitable order in the Mediterranean. However, their alliance caused growing tension with another key player in Roman politics, Gaius Octavian, Caesar's nephew and heir. Octavian, more pragmatic and cautious, saw the alliance of Antony and Cleopatra as a threat to his own rise to power. He launched a massive propaganda campaign against Antony and Cleopatra, portraying them as a threat to Roman values and traditions. Octavian skillfully used rumors and exaggerations to turn the Roman people and the Senate against his opponents. Tensions between Octavian and the Antony-Cleopatra alliance grew, eventually leading to open conflict. The decisive clash occurred in 1031 BC at the Battle of Actium, a naval battle off the coast of Greece. The battle was fierce, but ultimately Octavian's forces achieved a decisive victory. The defeat at Actium was a turning point, sealing the fate of Antony and Cleopatra as well as the fate of Egypt. After their defeat at Actium, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. Octavian pursued them, and soon his forces invaded Egyptian territory. Faced with inevitable defeat and the prospect of capture and humiliation, Mark Antony committed suicide. Cleopatra, finding herself in a desperate situation, also made a decision about her fate. According to historical accounts, Cleopatra died in 1030 BC. Her death, like her life, is shrouded in legend. The most common version holds that she committed suicide by allowing a venomous asp to bite her to avoid the shame of capture and a triumphal procession in Rome. It was a tragic end for Egypt's last queen. After her death, Egypt was annexed by the Roman Empire, ending 1,000 years of independent Egyptian rule. Cleo's legacy. So, we've been transported to ancient Egypt, to an era when its fate was closely tied to the great powers of the Mediterranean. Our story focuses on one of the most famous women of antiquity, Cleopatra. But before we delve into her turbulent life, let's return to her birth and early years to understand the world she entered and how she prepared for her fateful role. Cleopatra was born in 1196 BC. She was the daughter of King Ptolemy XII, Eules, who ruled Egypt during turbulent times. The Ptolemaic dynasty, founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals, had ruled Egypt for several centuries. However, by that time, Egypt was no longer the powerful state it had been during the Pharaonic era. The Roman Republic was gaining strength, and its influence on Egyptian politics was becoming increasingly perceptible. Ptolemy XII, to strengthen his position and gain Rome's support, generously bestowed gifts on Roman politicians. This, of course, drained the Egyptian treasury and caused discontent among the population. Cleopatra spent her childhood in the palace of Alexandria, the capital of Egypt. Alexandria was one of the greatest cities in the world at the time. It was a cosmopolitan center of scholarship, culture, and trade. Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, and other cultures mingled here. The palace where young Cleopatra lived was saturated with luxury and intrigue. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was not the most powerful ruler, and his throne was often under threat. Cleopatra wasn't her father's only child. She had several siblings who also had claims to the throne. According to Ptolemaic tradition, siblings often intermarried to preserve the purity of the royal bloodline. Thus, when Cleopatra grew up, she was married to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was still quite young. But royal power in Egypt was never stable. Ptolemy XII, exiled from Egypt by his people, managed to return with the help of Roman mercenaries. He ruled until his death in 1054 BC. After his death, according to his will, power was to pass to his eldest daughter, Cleopatra, and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who were to rule jointly. Cleopatra's early years were a time of intense learning. She grew up surrounded by educated people, and for her, as heir to the throne, this was vital. She received an excellent education, studying not only history and literature, but also science. Particular attention was paid to languages. Cleopatra was the only member of the Ptolemaic dynasty to learn Egyptian. This was crucial for the ruler of Egypt, as most of her predecessors spoke only Greek, the language of their ancestors. Knowing the local language allowed her to communicate with the common people, understand their needs, and strengthen her ties to Egypt. She also knew Greek, like the rest of the dynasty, and Latin, which would prove useful in the future, as well as Aramaic and other languages. She was taught diplomacy, the art of governance, and economics. She observed court life, political intrigue, and how her father dealt with Roman ambassadors. All of this shaped her as a future ruler. She saw how fragile power can be, and understood that to preserve Egypt, one must be not only strong, but also wise. While Cleopatra was receiving her education, her brother, Ptolemy XIII, still quite young, was under the influence of his advisors. These advisors, ambitious and cunning, saw Cleopatra as a rival. They sought to strengthen Ptolemy XIII's power and rid themselves of Cleopatra's influence. When Cleopatra was about 20 years old, she was officially declared co-regent with her brother. However, real power gradually shifted into the hands of courtiers who were opposed to her. In 1051 BC, under pressure from these advisors, Cleopatra was forced to leave Alexandria and go into exile. She found refuge in Syria, where she began gathering supporters to reclaim the throne. It was a difficult period in her life. Exiled and deprived of power, she was not resigned. She believed in her right to the throne and her ability to govern Egypt. Her early years, her education, her observations of political life, all of this prepared her for this trial. She understood that to return, she would need not only an army, but also intelligence, diplomacy, and perhaps outside assistance. It was at this moment, as she searched for a way back, that events occurred in Egypt that would radically change the course of her life and the history of the entire Mediterranean. A Roman general whose name will forever remain in history, Gaius Julius Caesar, arrived in Egypt. Even as a young woman, Cleopatra observed how fragile power could be and understood that preserving Egypt required not only strength, but also wisdom. While Cleopatra was pursuing an education, her brother, Ptolemy XIII, still quite young, was under the influence of his advisors. These advisors, ambitious and cunning, saw Cleopatra as a rival. They sought to strengthen Ptolemy XIII's power and rid themselves of Cleopatra's influence. When Cleopatra was about 20 years old, she was officially declared co-regent with her brother. However, real power gradually shifted into the hands of courtiers who were opposed to her. In 1501 BC, under pressure from these advisors, Cleopatra was forced to leave Alexandria and go into exile. She found refuge in Syria, where she began gathering supporters to reclaim the throne. This was a difficult period in her life. An exile, deprived of power, she did not resign herself to it. She believed in her right to the throne, and her ability to govern Egypt. Her early years, her education, her observations of political life, all of this had prepared her for this challenge. She understood that to return, she would need not only an army, but also intelligence, diplomacy, and perhaps outside assistance. It was at this moment, as she searched for a way back, that events occurred in Egypt that would radically change the course of her life and the history of the entire Mediterranean. A Roman general whose name will forever remain in history, Gaius Julius Caesar, arrived in Egypt. Caesar's arrival in Egypt in 1051 BC was prompted not only by personal interests, but also by a complex political situation. The Roman Republic, mired in civil war, sought control of Egypt's rich resources, one of the largest grain suppliers. Ptolemy XIII, the young pharaoh, came into conflict with his sister Cleopatra, who had a legitimate claim to the throne. Ptolemy's advisors, seeing Cleopatra as a threat to their power, urged his brother to act against her. It was into this complex situation, with Cleopatra in exile and Egypt engulfed in civil strife, that Caesar arrived. His arrival was dictated by the need to resolve the dispute between brother and sister in order to ensure stability and Roman influence in the region. Caesar, an experienced politician and military leader, understood that maintaining order in Egypt was beneficial to Rome. He arrived in Alexandria, where he was welcomed as an arbitrator in the succession dispute. For Cleopatra, an exile, this was an unexpected opportunity. She understood that only a strong ally, capable of influencing the course of events, could help her regain the crown. Her determination and intelligence allowed her to exploit this situation to her advantage. While Cleopatra was gathering her forces in Syria, Alexandria continued to live its normal life, despite the political tensions. The city, a cultural and scientific center of the ancient world, continued to flourish. The streets were crowded with people, merchants, artisans, scholars, soldiers. Libraries housed thousands of scrolls, and museums explored the achievements of human thought. The life of an ordinary Alexandrian, whether a fisherman fishing in the Mediterranean or a baker baking bread for the city's residents, flowed along at a familiar pace. However, intrigues swirled in high circles. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, seeking to retain power, tried in every way to discredit Cleopatra and increase their influence over the young pharaoh. They spread rumors and hatched conspiracies, seeking to isolate Ptolemy from any outside influences other than their own. Cleopatra, meanwhile, wasted no time in exile. She used her knowledge of Greek language and culture and her connections with Hellenistic rulers to secure support. She understood that returning to the throne would require not only force, but also cunning. Her intelligence, her education, her knowledge of languages, all these became her weapons in the struggle for Egypt. She was not simply the heir to the throne. She was a politician ready to act. Cleopatra's meeting with Julius Caesar was one of the most pivotal moments in her life and in Egyptian history. According to legend, to gain access to Caesar without his guards, Cleopatra wrapped herself in a carpet or sack and was carried to his chambers. This daring act demonstrated her determination and willingness to take extreme measures. Caesar, a man who valued courage and intelligence, was impressed. He saw in Cleopatra not just a contender for the throne, but also an intelligent, ambitious woman who could become a valuable ally. At this time, Egypt was in chaos. Ptolemy XIII and his advisors tried to resist Roman intervention, but their forces were insufficient. Caesar, seeing that Cleopatra's support could ensure Egypt's stability and loyalty to Rome, decided to intervene on her behalf. He was not only a military leader, but also a skilled diplomat. His goal was not to conquer Egypt, but to establish a protectorate that would guarantee grain supplies and a strategic position. Cleopatra, for her part, saw in Caesar a chance to regain power and strengthen Egypt's position. Their alliance was based on mutual benefit and, it is believed, personal sympathy. Caesar, while in Egypt, became embroiled in a civil war between the supporters of Ptolemy and Cleopatra. After Caesar sided with Cleopatra, a period of military conflict began in Alexandria. The city, a symbol of culture and scholarship, became a battlefield. Roman legions under Caesar's command fought against the forces of Ptolemy XIII. During these battles, part of the library of Alexandria, one of the greatest repositories of ancient knowledge, was threatened with destruction. This tragic event cast a shadow over the military action. Nevertheless, thanks to Caesar's determination and Cleopatra's support, the young pharaoh's supporters were routed. Ptolemy XIII himself perished in the Nile while attempting to escape. Following these events, Cleopatra was restored to the throne, no longer as co-regent with her brother, but as sole ruler. However, her power was now closely tied to Rome. Caesar, having fulfilled his mission, did not abandon Egypt entirely. He left a small Roman garrison there to ensure compliance with the agreements. Having become queen, Cleopatra was obliged to maintain relations with Rome and with Caesar himself. This period marked the beginning of a new stage in Egyptian history, the era of Roman protectorate, during which the Egyptian monarchy, although maintaining a semblance of independence, was strongly influenced by the Roman Empire. Cleopatra, having regained the throne with the support of Julius Caesar, began a period of independent rule, which, however, was marked by Roman influence. Caesar, returning to Rome, left a governor in Egypt, while Cleopatra herself traveled to Rome, where she spent some time. She arrived there in 1051 BC, becoming the first Egyptian queen to visit the Roman capital. Her stay in Rome aroused great interest. She was accepted as an important ally, and her relationship with Caesar, both political and, according to some sources, personal, became the subject of speculation. During this period, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesarion, whom she considered the heir to both Egypt and, possibly, the Roman Empire. Her presence in Rome, her wealth, and her charm made a strong impression on Roman society. However, her position was precarious. She was in a foreign land, dependent on Caesar's favor. In Egypt, in her absence, her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, managed affairs, whom she appointed co-regent. For Cleopatra, life in Rome was not only a political maneuver, but also an opportunity to study Roman culture, customs, and the political system from the inside. She sought to strengthen her position and secure the future of her son and her kingdom. The death of Julius Caesar in March 1044 BC was an event that radically changed the political landscape of the Mediterranean and presented Cleopatra with new challenges and threat. Cleopatra, recognizing the fragility of her position and Rome's ambitions, understood that to maintain power, she needed a powerful ally. It was at this crucial moment that Julius Caesar, one of the most remarkable figures of antiquity, entered the picture. Their meeting, which took place in 48 BC, was not just a chance event, but a key moment in the history of Egypt and Rome. After Pompey the Great's defeat at the Battle of Pharsalus, he sought refuge in Egypt, hoping for help from his former ally, Ptolemy XIII. However, the young pharaoh, influenced by his advisors, made a fateful decision. Pompey was assassinated upon arrival, incurring the wrath of Julius Caesar, who himself arrived in Alexandria shortly thereafter. Caesar, as a Roman general and politician, could not tolerate such disregard for himself and Roman law. He demanded an explanation from the Egyptian court and, as a result, intervened in Egypt's internal affairs. During this period, Cleopatra, exiled from Alexandria by her brother Ptolemy XIII, found herself in opposition to the ruling court. According to legend, it was then that she decided to resort to a most daring tactic to meet Caesar. Wrapped in a carpet, or, according to other versions, in a bed linen sack, she was secretly brought to Caesar's palace. This daring act, demonstrating her determination and resourcefulness, made a huge impression on Caesar. He saw in her not just a young queen, but an intelligent, ambitious, and courageous leader capable of governing her kingdom. Their acquaintance quickly developed into a strategic alliance. Caesar, in need of resources and support to consolidate his power in Rome, saw Cleopatra as an ideal partner. She, in turn, sought a powerful supporter to restore her legitimate rule and ensure Egypt's independence. Caesar sided with Cleopatra in the civil war that broke out between her and her brother. This Roman intervention in Egyptian affairs marked the beginning of a period in which Egypt effectively became a Roman protectorate. Caesar, having proven himself a skilled commander and politician, won the Alexandrian War. Ptolemy XIII died, and Caesar restored Cleopatra to the throne, but as co-regent with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. However, real power remained in Cleopatra's hands, and the Roman presence in Egypt became palpable. Egypt, once a powerful state, was now dependent on the will of the Roman dictator. Cleopatra's reign with Caesar was marked by the strengthening of her position and the restoration of some order in Egypt. She demonstrated her diplomatic and managerial talents, managing to maintain relative stability in the country. Caesar, in turn, gained access to Egypt's rich resources, which were crucial for his military campaigns and political ambitions. Their alliance was pragmatic, based on mutual interests, but according to contemporaries, a more personal relationship also developed between them. Cleopatra, seeking to strengthen ties with Rome and secure the future of her kingdom, bore Caesar a son, whom she named Caesarion. She saw him as the heir not only to the Egyptian throne, but also, perhaps, the future ruler of Rome. This desire underscored her ambition and belief in her son's special role. After the Alexandrian War, Caesar, leaving a small Roman garrison in Egypt to ensure loyalty, set out to return to Rome. Cleopatra, understanding the importance of maintaining personal ties with the powerful Roman leader, followed him. This was an unprecedented event, the first time an Egyptian queen had visited Rome. Her arrival in 151 BCE sparked enormous interest and excitement in Roman society. She was received with honors as an important ally. Her luxury, her intelligence, her exotic beauty, and, of course, her relationship with Caesar himself became the subject of heated discussion. Cleopatra spent some time in Rome, staying in one of Caesar's villas. This was not simply a diplomatic stay, but also an opportunity for her to deeply study Roman culture, politics, and social mores. She observed the workings of Roman life, the functioning of the Senate, and the way Romans lived. All of this undoubtedly served her well later. She sought to strengthen her position, secure the support of influential Roman circles, and, most importantly, secure the future of her son and her kingdom. Her presence in Rome, while admired, was also a reminder of the growing Roman influence in Egypt. She was queen, but at the same time dependent on the favor of Caesar, whose power was undeniable. While she was in Rome, affairs in Egypt were managed by her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, whom she left as her co-ruler. However, in essence, power remained in her hands, and the Roman protectorate ensured this power. Life in Rome, full of intrigue and splendor, was an important stage for Cleopatra, preparing her for further trials. While Cleopatra was in Rome establishing close ties with Julius Caesar, Egypt, while formally remaining under the rule of her young brother Ptolemy XIV, effectively came under Roman protectorate. This period, beginning around 1051 BC, marked a new chapter in the country's history, where the ancient traditions of the Egyptian monarchy intertwined with the growing influence of the powerful Roman Republic. Caesar, a strategist and far-sighted politician, understood the value of Egypt. A wealthy country with a developed agriculture, particularly grain production, it was essential for Rome's food security. Furthermore, control of Egypt gave Rome a strategic advantage in the Mediterranean. Installing Cleopatra on the throne as a loyal ally was a profitable decision for Caesar. He did not seek outright annexation, preferring to govern through a loyal ruler, which allowed him to maintain the appearance of Egypt's independence while ensuring its subordination to Roman interests. Life in Egypt during this period continued to follow its age-old patterns, despite external political pressure. Alexandria, the capital, was bustling with activity. The city remained one of the greatest intellectual and cultural centers of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria, though experiencing hard times, still attracted scholars and thinkers. Merchants could be seen on the streets offering goods from all over the known world. Spices from India, fabrics from Phoenicia, glass from Syria. Artisans continued to create exquisite items from gold, silver, and faience, following ancient traditions. Ordinary Egyptians, primarily farmers, lived by the rhythm of the agricultural year, determined by the Nile's floods. Their lives revolved around cultivating the land, growing wheat, barley, and flax. The harvest was the foundation of prosperity for both them and the state, as a significant portion went toward taxes and exports. Daily life took place in small villages where life flowed steadily and predictably. People gathered to work in the fields, help each other, and celebrate festivals associated with natural cycles and ancient deities. Returning from Rome, Cleopatra sought to consolidate her power and restore Egypt's glory. She actively pursued governance, relying on Roman support. Her goal was not simply to retain the throne, but to restore the former power of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She implemented reforms aimed at improving the economy, encouraged trade, and supported culture and the arts. Under her reign, Egypt remained a significant player in the political arena, albeit under the shadow of Roman influence. It's important to understand that Roman protectorate did not mean complete subordination in every respect. Egypt retained its administrative structure, its army, and its laws. But foreign policy and major strategic decisions were under Roman control. Cleopatra, a clever and ambitious ruler, skillfully navigated between these two realities, using Roman force to strengthen her own power and protect Egyptian interests as best she could under the prevailing circumstances. This period was a time of relative stability for Egypt, albeit one marred by the awareness of Rome's growing power, which inevitably shifted the balance of power in the region. The assassination of Julius Caesar, which occurred in March 1944 BC, was a turning point not only for Rome, but also for Egypt and, of course, for Cleopatra. Like a lightning strike, this event shattered the established order and presented the queen with new, complex challenges. Caesar, her ally and patron, was dead. His death left a power vacuum in Rome, and uncertainty for Cleopatra and her young son Caesarion, whom she saw as heir to both the Egyptian and, possibly, the Roman throne. Cleopatra was in Rome when the assassination occurred. She was living in a luxurious villa given to her by Caesar and enjoying her position. She was not just a guest, but also a key political player, whose presence in Rome demonstrated Caesar's influence and interest in Egypt. After his death, her position became precarious. Senators who had opposed Caesar now viewed her with suspicion. Egypt, though formally independent, now found itself in a much more vulnerable position without its Roman protector. It was imperative to act quickly. Cleopatra, with her keen intellect and natural insight, understood that remaining in Rome had become dangerous. She packed her belongings, cared for her son, and, taking advantage of the turmoil following Caesar's death, left Rome. Her departure was discreet, quiet, to avoid possible persecution. Returning to Alexandria, she found herself confronted with a new reality. Now she had to reassert her authority in Egypt and find a way to preserve the independence of her kingdom in the turbulent world of Roman politics. During this period, Egypt, despite Roman influence, lived its own life. Agriculture remained the foundation of the economy. The Nile River, the source of life, overflowed, bringing fertile silt, and farmers sowed their fields with wheat, barley, and flax. The harvest was the basis of prosperity for both the farmers and the state, as a significant portion went toward taxes and exports. Daily life took place in small villages, where life flowed steadily and predictably. People gathered to work in the fields, help each other, and celebrate festivals associated with natural cycles and ancient deities. Returning from Rome, Cleopatra sought to consolidate her power and restore Egypt's glory. She actively pursued governance, relying on Roman support. Her goal was not simply to retain the throne, but to restore the former power of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She implemented reforms aimed at improving the economy, encouraged trade, and supported culture and the arts. Under her reign, Egypt remained a significant player in the political arena, albeit under the shadow of Roman influence. It is important to understand that Roman protectorate did not mean complete subordination in every respect. Egypt retained its administrative structure, its army, and its laws, but foreign policy and major strategic decisions were under Roman control. Cleopatra, a clever and ambitious ruler, skillfully navigated between these two realities, using Roman force to strengthen her own power and protect Egypt's interests as best she could under the prevailing circumstances. This period was a time of relative stability for Egypt, although overshadowed by the awareness of the growing power of Rome, which inevitably changed the balance of power in the region. Caesar's death opened the way for a power struggle in Rome. His nephew, the young Octavian, was declared his successor. Soon after, another contender emerged, Mark Antony, one of Caesar's closest associates, who was in Egypt at the time. He returned to Rome to assert his rights and gather supporters. Egypt, with its wealth and strategic location, became the focus of Roman politicians' attention. Cleopatra, finding herself in a difficult situation, had to decide with which of these powerful Romans she should forge a new alliance. Her intuition and political calculation told her that Mark Antony, with his power and influence, could be the key to preserving her throne and Egypt's independence. After Caesar's death, Rome plunged into turmoil. Power fell into the hands of a few powerful figures, notable among them the young Octavian, Caesar's nephew, and Mark Antony, one of his most loyal generals. It was during this turbulent period when Egypt, despite its ancient status, found itself at the crossroads of Roman ambitions that Cleopatra once again found herself in the spotlight. Mark Antony, returning to Rome after Caesar's assassination, soon assumed control of the eastern provinces. His route led through Egypt, and it was here in Alexandria that he had his fateful encounter with the queen. This wasn't Cleopatra's first encounter with a Roman general. She had already met Julius Caesar himself, with whom she had a son, Caesarion. But now the situation was different. Caesar was dead, and several men were vying for his position. Mark Antony arrived in Alexandria in 41 BC. Cleopatra, a true daughter of her dynasty, knew how to impress. She didn't simply wait for him. She organized a lavish reception designed to showcase Egypt's wealth and grandeur. According to descriptions, she arrived on her ship, decorated in gold and purple, with purple sails and silver oars. The queen herself appeared as the goddess Aphrodite, surrounded by her servants dressed as muses and erotic figures. It was a veritable theatrical performance designed to captivate the Roman general. Antony, a passionate man with a penchant for luxury, was captivated. He was older than Cleopatra, around 40, while she was just over 20. The age difference, however, was no obstacle. A connection developed between them that quickly grew from a political alliance into something deeper. It's important to understand that for Cleopatra, this was more than just a romance. It was a carefully calculated political gamble. She needed a strong ally who could defend Egypt from Roman expansion and ensure her own stable rule. Antony, with his power and influence in the East, seemed the ideal candidate. Their relationship developed rapidly. Cleopatra accompanied Antony on his travels, including to Rome, where she spent some time. She bore him 3 children, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. These children became a symbol of their union, as well as the potential future of Egypt and Rome's eastern possessions. During this period, Egypt experienced a unique heyday. Under Roman protection, but with Antony's strong support, Cleopatra was able to consolidate her power and restore the country's economic well-being. She actively managed the country, encouraged trade, and built and restored temples. Alexandria remained one of the world's greatest cultural and scientific centers. Life in the capital was vibrant. Markets bustled in the streets, selling spices, fabrics, and grain. Libraries and museums were a thriving scientific community. Court life was filled with receptions, banquets, and cultural events. Ordinary Egyptians, farmers and artisans, went about their daily lives, cultivating their fields and creating goods, following centuries-old traditions. Of course, their livelihoods depended on the harvest, taxes, and the overall political stability that the alliance with Antony ensured during this period. However, this alliance was not without its complications. In Rome, Antony's relationship with Cleopatra was increasingly resented. His adversary, Octavian, in particular, exploited the union for propaganda purposes. He portrayed Antony as a man under the spell of an Eastern queen, a weak-willed ruler who had forgotten his Roman duties. These accusations, although exaggerated, resonated with many Romans who feared the rise of Eastern influence. Meanwhile, Antony and Cleopatra were making their own plans. They dreamed of creating a vast empire in the East, where Egypt would play a key role. Antony even granted Cleopatra and their children lands and titles, which provoked a violent reaction in Rome. This was perceived as an attack on Roman foundations and territorial integrity. Thus, Cleopatra's encounter with Mark Antony became a turning point in her life and in Egyptian history. It was a period when love, politics, and rivalry were entangled in a tight knot that would be unraveled in the events to come. Her alliance with Antony gave Cleopatra hope of preserving her independence, but it also set her and Egypt on a path to confrontation with the rising power of Octavian. Cleopatra's meeting with Mark Antony, as we've already mentioned, was a turning point. This alliance, which began as a political one, quickly developed into something more, influencing the fate of Egypt and Rome itself. The period of their joint reign, which can be roughly dated from 41 BCE onward, marked a time of relative prosperity for Egypt, while Roman ambitions continued to grow. Cleopatra, a wise and far-sighted ruler, understood that to maintain Egypt's independence, she needed a strong ally. Mark Antony, an influential Roman general and member of the Second Triumvirate, seemed the ideal choice. Their relationship, based on mutual respect and, according to many sources, deep affection, allowed Cleopatra to strengthen her position and expand Egypt's influence. Under their joint rule, Alexandria, the capital of Egypt, remained one of the greatest cultural and economic centers of the Mediterranean. Its ports were filled with ships trading grain, fabrics, spices, and precious stones. Artisans toiled in their workshops, creating exquisite items of gold, silver, and glass. The famous Library of Alexandria, though experiencing difficult times, continued to attract scholars and thinkers. Egyptian farmers continued to cultivate the fertile lands of the Nile Valley, relying on the great river's annual floods. Grain harvests such as wheat and barley were the foundation of the country's economy and a source of prosperity. As pharaoh, Cleopatra devoted attention to maintaining irrigation systems and ensuring agricultural stability. This not only ensured food security for the population, but also allowed for the export of surpluses, generating revenue for the treasury. The lives of the common people, of course, differed from the opulence of the royal court. Peasants lived in modest homes, their daily lives determined by the rhythm of agricultural labor and centuries-old traditions. Craftsmen worked in their workshops, and merchants conducted business in the markets. However, thanks to the stability provided by the alliance with Antony and the wise rule of Cleopatra, life for most Egyptians was relatively calm and predictable. At the same time, Roman ambitions were not stagnant. Mark Antony, as one of the rulers of the Roman Republic, sought to expand its borders and strengthen its influence. His relationship with Cleopatra, although based on personal feelings, also had profound political significance. Antony saw Egypt as a valuable ally and a source of resources for his military campaigns and political intrigues. Cleopatra, in turn, used this alliance to restore Egypt to its former glory. She dreamed of her kingdom becoming a powerful power capable of rivaling Rome. Their joint plans, as we have already mentioned, included the creation of a vast eastern kingdom in which Egypt would play a key role. Antony, confirming his intentions, granted Cleopatra and their children significant territories and titles, which provoked a strong reaction in Rome itself. These so-called Alexandrian gifts, made in 34 BC, were perceived by many Romans as a direct attack on Roman interests and territorial integrity. They saw it as confirmation of their fears regarding growing Eastern influence and a threat to the foundations of Rome. This became one of the key moments that escalated the conflict between Antony and his main rival, Octavian. Thus, Cleopatra's reign alongside Mark Antony was a time when Egypt experienced a renaissance of sorts, while Roman ambitions, conversely, became increasingly visible and conflicting. Love and politics became tightly intertwined, foreshadowing the trials to come. This alliance, which seemed so promising, simultaneously set Egypt on a path to direct confrontation with the rising power of Octavian, inevitably leading to a decisive clash. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Roman Republic, which was slowly but surely moving toward imperial status, Gaius Octavius, the future Emperor Augustus, was gaining power. He closely monitored Mark Antony's every move, especially his relationship with the Egyptian queen. Octavian, a calculating and far-sighted man, understood that the alliance between Antony and Cleopatra posed a serious threat to his own ambitions and to the stability of Rome as he saw it. He began a subtle but highly effective campaign aimed at discrediting Antony and portraying him as having succumbed to Eastern influence. This propaganda war was one of Octavian's most powerful tools. He skillfully exploited the Roman popular assemblies and the Senate, presenting Antony not as a Roman general and politician, but as Cleopatra's puppet, who had devoted her strength and resources to a foreign queen. Rumors and gossip, fueled by Octavian's supporters, spread throughout Rome, painting an image of Antony as a man who had forgotten his Roman roots and betrayed the interests of the Republic for personal gain and passion. Particular attention was paid to the donations of Alexandria, which we discussed earlier. Octavian presented them not as a diplomatic act or confirmation of an alliance, but as a shameful humiliation of Rome. He claimed that Antony, a Roman citizen, had supposedly handed over lands belonging to Rome to a foreign queen and the children born to her. This was a powerful blow to Roman pride and national identity. Propaganda painted a picture of Cleopatra seeking to establish her own empire in the East, using the resources and influence of the Roman general. Antony himself may have underestimated the power of this propaganda, or believed that his military successes could counter it. He continued to strengthen his position in the East, spending time with Cleopatra and their children. Meanwhile, a certain prosperity reigned in Egypt. Cleopatra, a wise ruler, paid attention to the economy of her kingdom. She supported agriculture, the foundation of the Egyptian economy, and oversaw the irrigation systems that ensured the fertility of the lands along the Nile. Trade, both domestic and foreign, also flourished. Alexandria remained one of the major cultural and economic centers of the Mediterranean, attracting merchants, scholars, and artisans from all over the known world. Daily life in Egypt at that time was fairly leisurely for most of the population, dependent on the cycles of the Nile and agricultural labor. Life in cities like Alexandria was more vibrant. Here, people of various nationalities could be seen: Greeks, Egyptians, Romans, and Jews. Craftsmen toiled in their workshops, merchants offered their wares in markets, and scholars and philosophers gathered in libraries and academies. For the nobility and those close to the royal court, life was full of luxury, feasts, and political intrigue. But for most commoners, it was focused on work and family concerns. While relative order seemed to reign in Egypt, tensions were mounting in Rome. Octavian wasn't simply spreading rumors, he was actively preparing for military conflict. He exploited the discontent of Roman citizens, their fears of Eastern influence, and Antony's alleged betrayal, to garner support from the army and the people. He began mobilizing his troops, strengthening his position, and seeking pretexts for open conflict. Cleopatra, a smart and insightful woman, understood the consequences of this escalation. She saw Rome, under Octavian's leadership, transforming from a republic into a centralized state, where one man sought absolute power. She also understood that her fate and the fate of her kingdom were inextricably linked with that of Mark Antony. Their alliance, initially built on mutual benefit and perhaps deep feelings, now became the object of a fierce political struggle. Octavian, for his part, was a master of political strategy. He understood that directly accusing Antony of treason would be too risky. Instead, he focused on presenting the conflict as a struggle to preserve Roman values and traditions against Eastern decadence and foreign influence. He skillfully played on Roman patriotism, presenting Cleopatra as a wily seductress who enslaved the Roman hero. Preparations for the conflict were underway on both fronts. Antony, relying on Egypt's resources and his own forces, was gathering an army and navy. He also attempted to enlist the support of other Eastern kings and rulers who could oppose Rome. Cleopatra, for her part, invested heavily in building ships and supplying troops. She understood that the outcome of the coming war would decide not only the fate of her and Antony's power, but also the future of the entire Eastern Mediterranean. Rome, under Octavian's leadership, also built up its military might. He conducted military exercises, replenished the treasury, and raised loyal legions. His propaganda machine worked non-stop, shaping public opinion and preparing the Romans for war. During this period, when political tensions reached their peak, many residents of Rome and its provinces sensed the approach of something momentous and perhaps tragic. The old political order was crumbling, and in its place, something new, not yet fully understood, was emerging. Thus, the period leading up to the decisive clash was marked not only by political maneuvering and preparation for war, but also by a powerful information campaign that shaped people's views and prepared them for the inevitable confrontation. Octavian, with his cold calculations and skill at manipulating public opinion, created the image of the enemy, with Cleopatra as his enemy and Antony as her obedient servant. This was not simply a political struggle, but a battle for the hearts and minds of the people, which was destined to decide the outcome of the war. It was 1325 B.C., and a battle destined to decide the fate of the Eastern Mediterranean loomed on the horizon. Known as the Battle of Actium, it marked the culmination of a decades-long power struggle between Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and the triumvirate of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. The scene was the narrow strait at Actium in western Greece, where the waters of the Ionian Sea meet the Gulf of Ambrakios. Mark Antony and Cleopatra gathered their forces in Greece, preparing for a decisive confrontation. Their fleet, impressive in size, consisted of ships built with Egyptian resources and Cleopatra's personal funds. Among them were enormous hectors, ships with 6 banks of oars that, despite their power, could be unwieldy in battle. In total, historians estimate their fleet numbered around 500 ships, including many smaller, more maneuverable vessels. They were joined by land forces, which were also significant in number. Octavian's opposing fleet, commanded by the experienced general Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, was somewhat smaller in number of ships, but was better organized and more maneuverable. Agrippa, proving himself a talented naval commander, exploited his knowledge of the terrain and tactical advantages. His ships, generally lighter and faster, were better suited to the conditions they were about to encounter. The day of the battle, September 1st, 1325 BC, was windy. This factor, like many others, played a role in the subsequent course of events. The ships of both fleets were drawn up in battle formations, ready for combat. On board were thousands of sailors and soldiers, each of whom understood the gravity of the moment. For the average person living in those days, such large-scale events were certainly far removed from everyday life. But their echoes reached even the most remote corners of the empire. Residents of cities and villages, although not directly involved in the battle, followed the news, hoping for victory and the stability it would bring. At the start of the battle, Antony and Cleopatra's fleet attempted to break out of the Gulf of Ambracios into the open sea. This was a risky decision, likely motivated by a desire to avoid a blockade and exploit their superior numbers in the open sea. However, Agrippa skillfully maneuvered, blocking the exit from the Gulf. A fierce battle ensued. The ships closed in, firing arrows and missiles. Grappling hooks were used, and the sailors engaged in hand-to-hand combat on the decks. At this moment, something happened that historians still discuss with particular attention. As the battle reached its climax, 38 ships under Cleopatra's command, including her personal flagship, suddenly turned away and headed south toward Egypt. Mark Antony, seeing this, followed her, leaving the majority of his fleet and land forces in danger. The reasons for this action are still a subject of debate. Was this a pre-planned operation by Cleopatra to save her treasures and part of her fleet? Or was it a spontaneous decision, driven by panic or the realization of the hopelessness of the situation? Whatever the case, this maneuver proved fatal. Antony's remaining ships, deprived of support and perhaps demoralized by their leader's actions, found themselves in an extremely vulnerable position. Agrippa's ships, more maneuverable and better prepared, began to surround and destroy them. Many ships were set ablaze, others sank. Thousands perished in the sea. The land forces left on shore were soon forced to surrender. The Battle of Actium ended in complete and unequivocal victory for Octavian. It was not just a military defeat, but a catastrophe for Mark Antony and Cleopatra, ending their ambitions and paving the way for Octavian's final establishment of power over the entire Roman world. Octavian's subsequent propaganda campaign portrayed Cleopatra as a seductress who had brought about the great Roman's downfall and as an enemy of Rome itself. This helped him consolidate power and legitimize his subsequent actions. The Battle of Actium, which took place in 1325 BC, became one of the most significant events in the history of antiquity. It not only shaped the political landscape of the Mediterranean for centuries to come, but also had a profound impact on the future of Egypt, which soon became a Roman province. For the people of that time, it was a time of uncertainty and change. But, as history shows, even in the most difficult moments, the human spirit and the desire to preserve heritage endure. After the crushing defeat at Actium, where the fate of their fleet and armies was sealed, Cleopatra and Mark Antony found themselves in an extremely vulnerable position. Octavian, having won a triumphant victory, was rapidly advancing toward Egypt. For Cleopatra, ruler of one of the world's oldest and wealthiest states, this was a time of profound crisis. Her empire, once powerful and independent, now found itself in danger of being completely subjugated by Rome. Arriving back in Alexandria, the capital of Egypt, Cleopatra and Antony were confronted with the reality of impending disaster. Octavian, who was strengthening his position daily, showed no desire to negotiate on equal terms. His goal was the complete subjugation of Egypt and the seizure of its immense wealth. Meanwhile, Alexandria, despite the political upheaval, continued to live its normal life. Merchant ships arrived and departed. The markets echoed with the sounds of merchants. And in luxurious palaces and modest homes, people went about their daily business. But an air of uncertainty hung over the city, a premonition of impending change. Antony, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, tried to find a way out. He sent envoys to Octavian, hoping to negotiate the preservation of at least part of his possessions and power for himself and Cleopatra. However, Octavian was adamant. He demanded Antony's complete surrender. At this point, according to some ancient authors, Antony, perhaps succumbing to despair or wanting to avoid the shame of complete captivity, committed suicide. Legend has it that he did so after believing false news of Cleopatra's death. This event marked a turning point, depriving Cleopatra of an ally and hope of protection. Left alone in the face of the victor, Cleopatra found herself in a hopeless situation. Her primary concern was securing the future of her children, especially Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, who could lay claim to a special position in Rome. She understood that her own fate was sealed. Octavian undoubtedly wanted to capture her alive so that he could parade her in chains through the streets of Rome in a triumphal procession, symbolizing his complete victory. For Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, such humiliation was unthinkable. In these final days, Cleopatra displayed not only fortitude, but also remarkable ingenuity. She attempted to negotiate with Octavian, hoping he would show mercy to her and her children. She likely counted on his political foresight, as preserving the life of the heir to an ancient dynasty could be beneficial to Rome. She also sought to ensure a dignified burial and preserve her royal dignity. According to most historical sources, Cleopatra chose death to avoid capture and humiliation. The most famous version of her death involves the bite of a venomous snake, the asp, which was believed to have been brought to her in a basket of fruit. This image became one of the most powerful and enduring symbols of her demise. The asp, associated in Egyptian mythology with the goddess Isis, with whom Cleopatra identified, became the instrument of her voluntary departure. This choice of death, according to many, was an act of final resistance, a way to maintain control over her own destiny and prevent her enemy from completely defeating her. The date of her death is uncertain, but it is believed to have occurred shortly after the Battle of Actium, likely in 31 BC. According to various versions, her two faithful servants, Charmion and Eris, also died with her. They may have helped her achieve her plan, or chose to die with their mistress. Cleopatra's death marked the end of the Hellenistic era in Egypt. Her body, according to Roman custom, was buried with Antony. Although Octavian was unable to display Cleopatra in his triumph, he nevertheless achieved his main goal. Egypt became a Roman province, and its wealth came under Roman control. The fall of Egypt to Rome was the logical conclusion of a long process. Cleopatra, the last of the Ptolemies, became a symbol of this transition. Her life, full of passion, intrigue, and political struggle, ended tragically, but left an indelible mark on history. She was not just a queen, but also an outstanding politician, diplomat, and intellectual, speaking many languages and striving to preserve the independence of her kingdom in the face of Rome's growing power. Her story, intertwined with the destinies of great Romans like Caesar and Antony, became the source of countless legends and works of art, continuing to inspire and fascinate people for millennia. Cleopatra's legacy is a multifaceted tale woven from historical facts, myths, and legends. Her vibrant and eventful life inspired a wave of stories passed down from generation to generation, evolving with new details and interpretations. It is this transformation from a real historical figure to a legendary image that forms the basis of her enduring legacy. The historical Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, was a woman of remarkable intellect and political talent. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, of Greek origin, which ruled Egypt after the conquests of Alexander the Great. Her reign fell during a difficult time, when the Roman Republic was rapidly gaining power, absorbing neighboring states. Cleopatra understood this reality well and used every means available to her to maintain the independence of her kingdom. She was not only a ruler, but also an educated woman, known, according to evidence, to many languages, including Egyptian, a rarity for her dynasty. This allowed her to communicate directly with representatives of different peoples, conduct negotiations, and understand the intricacies of diplomacy. Her relationships with the two most influential Romans of the time, Gaius Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, became central events in her life, and as a result, the basis of many myths. These alliances were not only personal, but also deeply political. Cleopatra saw Caesar and later Antony as pillars of her kingdom, a way to strengthen its position in a world dominated by Rome. She was a master strategist, able to use her personal qualities and charm to achieve political goals. Her ability to charm and persuade, her intellect and charisma, all played a significant role in her interactions with Roman leaders. However, it was precisely this relationship, tinged with passion and political intrigue, that became fertile ground for the emergence of legends. Roman propaganda, especially after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra, actively cultivated the image of the queen as a femme fatale, a seductress who brought about the downfall of great Roman generals. This image, advantageous to Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, was widely disseminated. It allowed Antony's defeat to be presented not as the result of his own mistakes or a changing political situation, but as a consequence of his infatuation with an Eastern queen. Thus, the historical Cleopatra, a pragmatic politician striving for the survival of her state, gradually transformed into the mythical Cleopatra, a symbol of fatal passion, exotic beauty, and destructive feminine power. Her image became an archetype that inspired artists, writers, and poets for centuries. Her story, full of drama, intrigue, and a tragic ending, was ideal for creating gripping narratives. Everyday life in Egypt during Cleopatra's time was complex and multi-layered. Alexandria, its capital, was one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities of the ancient world. Here, Greek, Egyptian, and Roman cultures blended. The city's inhabitants engaged in trade, crafts, science, and art. The great library of Alexandria, though in decline, remained a center of learning. Ordinary Egyptians, farmers, lived their ordinary lives, dependent on the Nile floods and harvests. For them, the politics of the great powers and the fate of the queen were likely distant, although taxes and economic changes brought about by Roman influence undoubtedly affected them. It's important to note that the image of Cleopatra created by the Romans differed greatly from how her own subjects might have perceived her. For the Egyptians, she was a pharaoh, the heir to ancient dynasties, and the embodiment of the goddess Isis. She supported Egyptian religious cults and traditions, which was important for legitimizing her power in the eyes of the local population. Her desire to maintain Egyptian independence, albeit through alliances with Rome, could have been perceived as a concern for the country's well-being. After her death and the annexation of Egypt by the Roman Empire, Cleopatra's image continued to live on. In Roman literature, for example, in Plutarch, who lived after her death, she is portrayed as a complex personality, combining both virtues and flaws. Drawing on various sources, Plutarch sought to present a more balanced portrait, acknowledging her intellect and political abilities, but also noting her passion and penchant for luxury. Medieval authors, in turn, often interpreted her story through the prism of Christian morality, either condemning her as a sinner or admiring her fortitude. During the Renaissance, when interest in antiquity was revived, Cleopatra became the subject of numerous plays, paintings, and musical works. She was presented as the embodiment of ideal beauty, tragic love, and political drama. Over the following centuries, her image continued to evolve, reflecting the spirit of the times. She became a symbol of Eastern exoticism, an embodiment of female emancipation, and an object of feminist interpretation. Each century found something in her story that resonated with its own ideas about power, love, beauty, and the role of women. Interesting, but not shocking, details of life during her era include, for example, the lifestyle of the Alexandrian nobility. They enjoyed exquisite feasts featuring a variety of dishes, including game, fruits, vegetables, and sweets. Clothing was made of fine fabrics, such as linen and silk, adorned with embroidery and precious stones. Leisure activities could include visiting the theater, reading scrolls, strolling through gardens, and participating in religious ceremonies. Egypt at that time was a major producer of grain, papyrus, and glass, which were exported throughout the Mediterranean. Alexandria was a center of scientific research, where such eminent scholars as Euclid and Archimedes worked, although their activities occurred earlier in the Ptolemaic era. Nevertheless, the atmosphere of intellectual inquiry persisted. As queen, Cleopatra lived in luxury, but her court was more than just a place for celebration. It was the center of government, where important decisions were made, diplomatic receptions were held, and strategic plans were developed. Her private chambers, according to descriptions, were richly decorated, but her greatest asset lay in her intellect and ability to govern. Modern historians continue to study Cleopatra's life, striving to separate fact from fiction. Archaeological finds, analysis of ancient texts, and new interpretations allow us to better understand her era and her role in it. It's important to remember that Cleopatra was not just a character in a drama, but a real person who lived in a specific time and faced specific historical challenges. Her legacy lies beyond the myths of her beauty and love affairs. Her true legacy is the story of a strong woman who fought for her country amid unprecedented political tension. She demonstrated that a woman could be not only a ruler, but also an outstanding politician, diplomat, and strategist. Her life, despite its tragic end, became an example of resilience and determination. Cleopatra remains one of the most recognizable figures of antiquity. Her name conjures up images of luxury, passion, and power. But behind these images lies a real historical figure whose life and reign were of immense significance to the history of Egypt and the entire Mediterranean world. Her story is an enduring reminder of the complexity of human relationships, the intertwining of the personal and the political, and how history can be rewritten and interpreted to suit specific agendas. It is precisely this duality, historical reality and mythological image, that makes Cleopatra so fascinating and enigmatic. She lives on in our consciousness as a symbol of eternal femininity, political strength, and an indomitable spirit that, even in the face of defeat, strove to maintain dignity and control over her own destiny. Her legacy is not just a collection of facts, but a living story that continues to inspire and provoke thought. And so, summing up our immersion into the life and times of Cleopatra, we see not only one of the most famous women of antiquity, but also the most striking embodiment of two seemingly opposing principles: eternal femininity and invincible political power. Her image, shrouded in centuries of myth and legend, appears before us today in a calmer historical light, allowing us to appreciate her not only as an object of admiration or condemnation, but as an outstanding statesman of her time. Cleopatra VII Philopator, who ruled Egypt during a turbulent era when the world's borders were rapidly shifting under the onslaught of Roman expansion, managed to maintain the independence of her kingdom longer than many might have expected. Her reign, which began in 1051 BC, coincided with the long-held rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, founded by Alexander the Great's general. She was not only a queen, but also the last of this dynasty, whose fate became inextricably linked with that of the entire Mediterranean. Her upbringing was exceptional. Educated in the finest traditions of Hellenistic scholarship, Cleopatra mastered many languages, allowing her to communicate directly with ambassadors and rulers of various nations. She studied philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and literature. This diverse education gave her not only a broad outlook, but also a keen mind, capable of analyzing complex political situations and finding innovative solutions. She understood that in a world where force of arms often decided everything, diplomacy and personal charm could be equally powerful tools. A meeting with Gaius Julius Caesar, the Roman general and politician, was a turning point not only in her life, but also in Egyptian history. Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 114 BC to settle a dynastic dispute. Cleopatra, then an exile, managed to find a way to appear before him and, according to legend, was smuggled into his chambers wrapped in a carpet. This daring escapade, if it occurred, demonstrates her determination and willingness to take risks to achieve her goals. An alliance with Caesar allowed her to reclaim the throne, and for a time, Egypt became a Roman protectorate while retaining its internal autonomy. During his stay in Egypt, Caesar became enchanted by Cleopatra, and they had a son, Caesarion. After Caesar's assassination in 144 BC, Cleopatra found herself in a difficult situation. Rome was plunged into civil war, and her position was precarious. However, she remained steadfast. Soon, her path crossed with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's heirs. Their meeting in Tarsus in 141 BC, as ancient authors describe, was truly regal. Cleopatra arrived on her luxurious ship, dressed in the garb of the goddess Aphrodite, astonishing everyone with her splendor and intelligence. A profound bond developed between them, combining personal feelings and political calculations. Her alliance with Mark Antony brought Egypt a period of relative prosperity. Antony, an influential Roman general, supported her ambitions, and together they ruled vast territories. Cleopatra sought to restore Egypt's glory, expand its influence, and secure a future for her children. She was not just a mistress, but also an equal partner in political affairs, a rarity for the time. However, this alliance inevitably led to conflict with Caesar's other heir, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus. Octavian saw the alliance between Antony and Cleopatra as a threat to Rome, and skillfully used propaganda, portraying Cleopatra as a wily seductress attempting to bend Rome to her will. Tensions escalated, and in 1331 BC, the decisive naval battle at Actium took place. The battle ended with the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra's fleet, marking the beginning of the end of their power. Cleopatra's final days were shrouded in tragedy. After their defeat at Actium, Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt. Octavian pursued them. Receiving false news of Cleopatra's death, Mark Antony committed suicide. Cleopatra, captured by Octavian, chose death over dishonor. According to the most common version, she committed suicide by allowing a venomous asp to bite her in 1030 BC. Her death marked the end of independent Egypt, which became a Roman province. But what remains for us of this great ruler? Cleopatra's legacy is not only a story of tragic love and the fall of a kingdom. It is, above all, the story of a woman who, despite all obstacles, managed to leave an indelible mark on history. She demonstrated that intelligence, education, and political will can make a woman an equal player in the most complex arena, the political one. Her diplomatic skills, her charisma, her desire to preserve the dignity of her people and her country, these are true traits that should be immortalized. Cleopatra remains a symbol not only of feminine strength, but also of the complex interweaving of personal destinies and great historical processes. Her life is a reminder that even in the darkest times, when all seems lost, one can fight for one's ideals and strive to retain control of one's destiny. She demonstrated that true greatness lies not only in power, but also in the ability to maintain dignity and resilience in the face of any adversity. Her story through the centuries continues to inspire and provoke thought. It teaches us the value of wisdom, diplomacy, and fortitude. It reminds us of the importance of pursuing knowledge and using it for good. Cleopatra is more than just a figure in history books. She is a living embodiment of human resilience, political acumen, and a rebellious spirit. Her legacy is a lesson for us all, a lesson that even in ancient times, women could be great rulers and remarkable individuals whose deeds shaped the course of history. And in this quiet recognition of her role, in understanding her place in the great stream of time, we find peace and deep respect for this extraordinary figure. May her story serve as a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the timeless beauty of the pursuit of knowledge and power gained through wisdom.